Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone.
Peter, lovely to have you on this episode of the Leadership Bites podcast. Welcome.
Thanks for inviting me.
And I, of course, know who you are because we have known each other for some time. But for those people that don't know who Peter is, it would be great just to get a little introduction that kind of just gives a sense of who you are and what you focus on.
Okay, I'm an occupational psychologist. I've been in business since the late 80s, although before that I was in academic life, working across 3 universities, working my way back down south, actually, from Edinburgh down to London. So I had 8 years in academic life, which actually was no bad thing. It stood me in very good stead. It kept me, made me immerse myself in the literature. And in fact, since that gave me a taste for the academic life, I've carried on writing for Oxford University Press, Weidenfeld, Orion, and more currently Routledge. So I keep myself informed and ensure I marinate in the literature constantly. But my day job is essentially generating reports for key appointments, and it ranges across sectors, public sector, private sector, industry, pharmacy, retail. So I think we met initially in a kind of quasi-retail setting, but but also I have to confess I have skin in this game because as part of this journey I've been on, I set up a publishing company in the early 90s which produces its own psychological tests and distributes them online. So we do a lot of assessment of pilots online, and what else? We've branched into, well, for many years, assessment centres, running assessments that involve more than psychological tests. They involve doing simulations, role plays, one-to-one interviews, ability tests, and putting all that information together and trying to produce a kind of holistic report of an individual and their suitability for a key appointment. So our focus is essentially on key appointments. And, yeah.
Okay. So if we talk about my world, which is leadership development and working with executives at that level, what is it that somebody who is looking at senior hires, what is it that they might get from a psychometric profile that if they don't already know, what might that give them that they think, well, I'll interview them, I'll look at their CV, what's a psychometric profile going to give me? If they just are on the outside looking in,
okay,
what would you tell them?
I always think that what a psychological test does is it fast tracks an interview. You're starting the interview at a very different place, a very different point than you might otherwise done if they just walked through the door, because they've already told you quite a lot about themselves. You know, the personality test has asked them a bunch of questions about themselves, which they may or may not have answered truthfully, but that's part of what you're interviewing them for, is to try and corroborate that data. So we're starting at a different place, and what the test should do, or certainly the report will do, is offer up probe areas where you as an employer would need more reassurance. You know, if they've described themselves as deeply insensitive, then you might want some assurance that they are able at times to pick up on other people's feelings and factor them into their thinking and decision making.
So it's a catalyst. It's a catalyst with insight. Would that be fair? It's not doing the work for you,
there was a famous journalist called John Pilger, and he describes how he'd spend hours and hours and hours talking to people, and it felt extremely privileged at the end of that process. But I always, when I heard him talk about it, I felt the same. I feel extremely privileged if I have someone's profile in front of me, that they have taken the time and trouble to tell themselves quite a lot about themselves and gone into areas that are actually in ordinary conversation quite difficult to question directly. I mean, that's one of the benefits of a personality test in particular, is that it asks sorts of impersonal questions that we wouldn't otherwise ask people.
So for some people, they really might not know the difference between the different versions of a psychometric profile. For some, it might be a catch-all phrase. So if we were going to say trait and type, if we were going to talk about the big five, for some people, they won't know anything about that. They'll have done something that is a part of a training program that would, and they might think it's actually quite a lighter intervention. So I think I'd almost like that sense from you, as if to the layman or somebody that didn't know the difference, one is preference, one is assessment. Just give that depth as to what the differences are.
I read quite a good description of the big five recently, that it's like if you're in a spaceship looking down on the planet, you'd see the big five continents. But obviously, if you're on Earth, you want to know what country you're in. So it's like taking the big five and taking a hammer to them, and you get out these much more interesting, more specific traits, which are worth measuring separately because they are, to some extent, independent of each other. And but all the time, I mean, the thing I must stress, Guy, is that I always treat personality data as tentative and problematic and inferential and, above all, in dire need of corroboration. So I think if you adopt that approach, a lot of the problems about faking go away because you assume that it's all problematic. You know, a lot of test publishers assume that these pesky test takers try and sabotage the process by lying and faking. Well, I think if you just assume it's all problematic and it's all likely to be prone to some sort of distortion, then that problem goes away because you just assume that all of it needs corroborating. And what I mean by that is it needs picking up an interview and pushing and probing and exploring and trying to corroborate. So I always say it's about taking inferences that come from people's responses and corroborating them, refining them, or indeed, of course, rejecting them.
So that means for some people, it's not let's get a psychometric profile that will do the work for us. That will tell us what we need to know, because that is a conversation I have sometimes with people where they go, well, right, we need to do a psychometric profile. And my position, and I think I'm hearing it in what you say, and I'd like you to calibrate my thinking, is no, it's a start of a conversation. Yeah. The individual will offer themselves to you through the profile. And there'll be things in there that even if they feel like a connection or they feel like a disconnection, that's a start of a conversation. Because if somebody says, for example, that their agreeableness, well, they're not using that vocabulary, but if there's a score that's high or low, that might be their innate trait. But in truth, if they have a coping mechanism for dealing with it, they could actually have a very high skill in that area. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Have I said that correctly?
That's also, of course, one of the limitations is people's self-awareness. You know, in reality, we are not always particularly self-aware, particularly in terms of where we are relative to other people. I think that's one of the main payoffs of a psychometric test, is that it gives you a feel for where people stand relative to others. Because I think we don't have a sense often of, you know, I might feel I'm persuasive, but I have no idea how much more persuasive other people are. And I think that's one of the, because one of the great critiques of personality testing is that it's an enormous con trick. That I ask you a bunch of questions about yourself, you fill in the thing, I then tell you what you told me.
Yeah.
And more often than not, people are amazed that I know all this about you.
But you told it.
Even though...
What ice cream do you
I've
like?
had extremely able people. I mean, I've had, the chief fire officer of a huge fire service saying, Peter, I don't know how you know all this about me. And I didn't have the heart to say, well, you told me.
Yes. What ice cream do you like?
Yeah.
Rum and raisin. How does it know? Well,
yeah.
you told it.
But having said that, there is more to it, because obviously we take that as a start point for having a discussion and relating those traits to the job demands.
Well, there is a validity question with testing that if we looked at trait type, if we looked at what some of the, and I have my own psychometric profile, but I would never say that it has psychometric validity. I would say actually
very few of them do.
Right.
And that's the huge problem for the industry.
Yes.
And it hasn't progressed much since the 1920s in being able to establish clear... In fact, there's this famous test that was done with the guy that bent the spoons. What was his name?
Uri Geller.
Uri Geller, yeah. If anyone could prove that he could do it...
That's right.
Or they could do it, they got $1 million. $1 million. And then that was extended to psychometric tests. If anyone could prove that a psychometric test could demonstrably improve the predictive validity of selection processes, they got $1 million. I mean, that $1 million still stands.
Right.
I mean, the criteria. I mean, I have to say, in fairness to the publishers, the criteria for establishing the predictive validity were quite tough. There had to be a reasonable sample size. You couldn't use the test data at selection. So the test data had to be kept and stored for a later date, and you had to have a clear sense of what the base rate was. In other words, the proportion of selected applicants who failed.
Yes.
And whether you could improve on that, and you had to have clear performance indicators to demonstrate there'd been some improvement. And a lot of problems with the whole validity is that the irony being that test publishers criticise recruitment processes for resting on subjective processes like interviews. But of course the reality is that a lot of the validity, the collection of validity data uses subjective outcomes, like supervisor ratings, management ratings, which are hugely problematic. So that's the irony, that's the paradox. You're looking at objective processes to predict subjective outcomes.
So when somebody is, when people invest, I think there's a difference between the tools that, I mean, you certified me for level AB when it came to psychometric testing,
Many
feels like
ago.
100 years ago. So, and if I look at something like your 16 PFs and those kind of profiles, to me, there's a real sense that they are really saying, this is who you are, as you tell us who you are, but this is who you're offering yourself to be. And in reality, if that is true and you aren't trying to kind of buck the system, you can take this test multiple times and in reality it would come out the same. Is that true? Whereas it was a something more like your Myers-Briggs or some of the preference type tools, why would somebody go, those tools you can use for development but not for assessment? What makes something valid for assessment rather than, you might just say, within a development program?
Certainly the multi-trait tests, I think, are as, if not more useful in development settings as the things like the Myers-Briggs, which are, they get people talking. I mean, the Myers-Briggs and similar tests like the colour one, Insights, is permission to talk. So it gets people talking about themselves in a safe way, because there are kind of guardrails around those concepts.
Right.
You can't start having a go at each other.
Yeah.
Because there are very clear limits to those concepts. But I think the key thing is, I'm going back to my point about corroboration, is that these things need corroborating. And the problem is that people often lack self-awareness and a notion of what is typical of their behaviour, because personality questionnaires ask you about what is typically the case.
Yes.
So
it requires a robust process to go with it. It's not get them to fill out a psychometric and then we'll read it and that'll tell us everything we need to know. No, it's do the psychometric test and then have a conversation with the individual to corroborate, or even to get some clarity about their position in relation to it, and then we will have the evidence to make a decision. So it's not. So when you've been involved in, well, actually, I'd like you to just talk for a few minutes about some of the roles that you've been called in to, which have required the level that you're operating at, from either with the airlines or with racing teams, or with when there's been disaster management and cultural shift. I'd just like to hear how what it is that you do has been called upon, because I think that really would give it a sense of context as well.
The biggest compliment I ever got was from Ofsted, where we went into a county council after it had been taken into special measures. And Ofsted said, and we did some very, very depth assessments of the senior managers, and which included personality tests, ability tests, and also some simulations and scenarios and so on. And Ofsted said whatever happened at this authority should be bottled, because it had made such a difference to the performance of the authority. Similarly, I spent a few years following the Grenfell tragedy, going through the invitation of the chief exec there. I spent ages, week in, week out, going through the management tiers, the management team, from director level right down to the people on the front line. And then it went beyond housing into other areas of the authority. And that was all in order to make a very profound change to the culture of the authority and make it much more...
There's assessment. Is that assessment centres? Is that the profiling? Is that what is that process?
That with Grenfell, it was just purely a personality questionnaire followed by an interview. And it's the same with, I've been working with an airline, and they're the same process. We do a personality questionnaire, which, as I say, I always take as inferential, tentative, problematic, and in dire need of corroboration. And I spend an hour and a half pushing those scores and finding out what's real about the way they describe themselves and what's patently not real.
So somebody does the assessment, they then sit with you, they have a conversation with you, which is to almost do a diagnostic on the report and go, what rings true, what under pressure may not stand up to muster, or whatever.
So you refine, corroborate, or reject the hypothesis.
And then are you writing a report
subsequent?
Yes. So there's do the test, have a conversation, here's a report, and that becomes something then for the line manager, or as part of a kind of a cultural shift. It's giving me an image of the individual, but then a collective picture.
Yeah, and some more. I mean, I always offer up areas where more reassurance is required. And in fact, a lot. I mean, probably about 90% of the time, the reality is that I don't do the interviewing. So I do with the pilots and in other scenarios, but a lot of the time, what I am left with is the fact that I have to give the recruiting managers the questions I would have asked if I'd been locked in a room with these people. I wouldn't have let them out until they'd given me evidence on these issues. So I put the onus on the recruiting manager to corroborate what's come out of their responses.
So if we looked at somebody wants to make an executive hire, they want to bring somebody into the C-suite, it's a really important recruitment process for them. If they get it wrong, it causes them a lot of problems. So that process fits that very nicely. Do the profile, here are the questions that will help you have the conversation with the individual. It could be that you do it, it could be that they do it, but then that information is gathered, and then that allows you then to do a summary report on the individual that will either go into maybe a second interview or a decision-making process. Would that be right?
In those situations, you probably also want to add to that mix a cognitive test, a critical reasoning test. So some objective evidence about people's ability to make judgments about other people's judgments, and particularly where those judgments are clouded by emotion and where they sort of start tapping into their own values and beliefs that are designed to cloud their judgment. So you want to know whether people can cut through all that and make clear, logical, critical judgments.
I'm particularly interested when it comes to senior hire around, or working with senior teams when it's developing those teams, around individual, the willingness of the individual to connect and work with others, and the underlying, for the want of a better word, grit of an individual. I've come to a bit of a conclusion that there are 100 ingredients that might make a cake, but actually if I'm in a team, I have to be willing to contribute outside of my own need, but also then I need the grit to work through the context of the problems that we've got. And within
can I just say,
yeah, of course,
grit was a concept that got people in the psychometric world quite excited years ago, and there were measures of grit. But in fact, what grit seems to be is a combination of conscientiousness and resilience. So it's quite possible to measure grit with the tools that we were historically using.
So I'm fascinated by that, and I think that's the bit that, for me, that level of that depth within a profile, even though it isn't giving you a definitive statement on the individual, I think I do appreciate, and that's why I think what you do is valuable in the work, is very much indicating and actually it's not so much about a justification, but if this is true, what that might mean. And I think that's interesting.
That's context.
Exactly. Yes, because
and that's where it becomes more interesting writing a report, and where you have to know the business.
Yes. To
get an understanding of how is this likely to play itself out.
Yes.
Given the politics of political acceptability, public acceptability, and organisation, acceptability to stakeholders, and that's where it gets more interesting. And that's where I enjoy writing reports, because I like to put myself in the seat of the decision maker, and think. And in fact, when with psychologists, I always put a sheet in front of their desks saying, "So what?" And getting them to focus on what does this actually mean in the context of this business.
Yes.
Getting them to actually project that set of scores into this organisational culture and this set of job demands.
Yes.
And that's where people actually begin to realise they're actually getting their money's worth.
Yes.
So I always start with the job demands. I always start with a briefing, a chat with the CEO or one of the directors to really get behind the job description.
Yes.
Because often the JD doesn't give you the whole picture.
I love that, and I think that's where it gets exciting, which is, look, the questionnaire is the questionnaire, but that's almost like doing a training program. Look, the training program's a training program. The reality is, what's your context, and what are these people actually dealing with? What is the truth of not the aspiration, not the brochure, but what's the truth of the internal dynamic, the human beings that are in play here, the stresses of the role, etc. And actually, this isn't about, is this a good human? Let's presume within reason, most people are good humans. It's whether or not, in the context they're going to be operating in, that actually they're going to be the right jigsaw piece.
It's about understanding their business.
Yes.
Do you understand our business?
Yes.
Can you help us? Do we like you?
Yeah.
And in fact, I did a tour some years ago. I did a tour of all of the MSC's courses in the country, and it was entitled "A Plea for a Connected Psychology," because I thought, at that level, the MSc in occupational psychology was going off down the wrong road. It was all telling people that what was crucial was learning 9 times of validity. Whatever, it's probably 11 now. But the reality had been lost sight of. That it's actually about understanding these people's businesses.
Yes.
So I started this talk off writing down all the white papers, the names of the white papers that had generated most of our business that year, and saying to people, does anyone know what any of these are? And of course, few people did. And the response to that lecture tour I got was quite extraordinary. People said, we're not told this. We're not told this, that it's crucial to understand the client's business. And I got letters saying, all we get told is how important it is to get chartered. Well, it is. I've never been asked where I'm chartered. I get asked, do you understand our business? Can you help? That's it. And not, are you chartered?
Well, I think there's something there.
I should say I am chartered.
Well, of course. Of course, goes without saying, a man of your calibre. But also, it's like if you're picking a photographer, I don't really care what the qualifications are. I want to see the photos. So there is something about, I think you're right, the fact that somebody has the qualification. Don't get me wrong, I think there's a huge value to that. But in truth, there'll be unqualified people and qualified people that are good or bad. There's a reputation, there's a history. And I know that you've been doing this now for, are you in your 4th decade?
30 probably.
Third decade.
Actually, 90.
Maybe. I don't know, but it's some time. So there is
35.
35. Okay. So there is something, isn't there? Because I know I'm 57. I've been doing leadership development for some time, and my knowledge has increased, but not exponentially. But my ability to operate in context has shifted. I yes, of course, every day is a school day and I learn a little something here and I'm constantly upskilling, fine. But in truth, the bulk of my knowledge exists. What deepens is, I think, which I really relate to with you, is context and being able to apply the knowledge and have the insight to translate that either into questions.
What does it mean in this business?
You've said this.
Is it at schools? Is your job demands? How do they relate?
That's right. And the profile is saying, or we're running a program that is challenging you to, with what you've said and the context you're operating in reality, how much of this, a particular assessment, how much of this is performative and how much of this is you offering yourself in a manner that once tested, in truth, you run the risk of failure. Because actually it feels as if there's a disingenuous connection between what you've either said and then what you're offering in relation to the context that you're going to be operating in. And I think that's interesting when you can see those gaps, I imagine. So when you do work with pilots, for example, what is it that you're looking for there? Because that's that's a key role.
That's quite an easy question to ask because there are some set, actually it's a legal requirement as well. There are some set things that the Civil Aviation Authority and the American equivalent look for. Obvious things like resilience, the leadership, team working, decision making, and working in a structured and regulated environment. So the ability to follow rules, ability to make effective decisions under load, ability to work effectively with others, demonstrate some leadership, and the ability to maintain a sense of perspective and not get frightened. I mean, some of the stories I hear when I'm interviewing these people, I mean, I just think if that had been me,
which is why we're not pilots.
I would have avoided my bowels and
exactly. So what is it on a profile for a pilot that you're looking for, just out of sheer interest? What tells you
it's just,
this person's in the right space?
Obviously resilience. And I mean, that is obviously probably the problem with that. That's one of the most fakeable scales. So if it's too high, you do get a bit worried about it. So you push them on that and try and get samples of where they've had to deal with, so you've got to back that up with some more concrete forms of evidence. And obviously self-belief, the ability to, fall back on your own judgment or have faith in your own judgment, but not to the point where you kind of rule out other people's analyses and thinking. One of the key things that I look at is how people handle their anxieties, because I mean, crudely speaking, in the literature, we can either externalise our anxieties, take them out on others.
Yeah.
So you see fault in everyone else, and you see you become much more suspicious and wary of others, or you internalise it, you beat yourself up. And so one of the things I'm interested in is how people externalise. So one of the things, in fact, that in the management literature, the literature of the derailed manager is essentially the literature of people who externalise their anxieties.
Yes.
So take it out on others. Everything's always other people's fault.
I'm super interested in that. I think that's when I look at.
And it's the same with pilots. If you're just assuming you're surrounded by idiots who can't make effective judgments at speed, then you're in trouble probably, because you're not going to respect other people's judgment.
So if you externalise an attack, that's not good. If you internalise and hold it in, that's not good.
Yeah, if you start, if you externalise too much, then you're bad to be around. You're going to be difficult to have around.
So if you emote in a negative way,
and if you beat yourself up all the time and sit there sobbing, that's no use either. But externalising, I think, is one of the real problems, because you become a nasty piece of work, and you're not good to have around.
So being able to be forthright but not aggressive.
Yeah.
Being able.
It's a difference between exactly. Sorry, I shouldn't point.
No.
The difference between assertion and dominance.
Yes.
And persuasiveness, dominance. Yeah.
Yeah.
That there's a kind of underlying unpleasant edge when you get the kind of the externalising that comes with the self-assertion.
And I'm very interested in that kind of capacity to verbalise the context that you're observing or the emotion that you're feeling in a manner that explains to the other person where you are. You can make demands of them, but actually getting that balance between motivating the individual, engaging them in conversation, but then having that maintenance of, I call it preservation of the personality, that being able to preserve your personality when you are under stress. And I think that's I can imagine for an airplane pilot, it's not a problem until it's a problem. And you can do all the virtual training that you like, but it might be a never in a career or a once in a career, rather like that Sully gentleman that landed the plane in the Hudson.
Yeah, extraordinary.
It might never happen in his life.
And there was another one where it was a British pilot, worked for Air New Zealand, went through the volcanic cloud,
right,
and all 4 of his engines packed up.
Yep.
And they sat there reading the manuals, and they sat there for 28 minutes. Going through the checklist, going through the manuals. There was nothing in the manuals that enabled them to figure out how they would start this thing up. So he took a judgment, put it into a dive, and it cleared the engines of the volcanic ash, and he restarted. And extraordinary. 28 minutes sitting there, figuring out what to do.
So that's the ability to hold your own counsel. To not have an emotional overload.
Exactly, yeah.
The capacity to...
Extraordinary.
Validate...
It's partly trained,
Of course.
It initially comes from having a stable personality.
Yes.
But then it's overlaid with training.
Yeah, so I noticed that in the fire brigade, which is, somebody said to me, competence outweighs fear.
Yeah,
you know, we train
you
out the fear.
You fall back on it, yeah.
Yeah, because it's trained to an almost autonomic response,
Yeah.
which I find very interesting. But then there is something about trusting your own counsel. And I think I'm very interested in people that internally validate versus externally validate. They look to others to understand if they are performing well. And for me, I want leaders to internally validate but externally calibrate, not the other way around. If they do it the other way around, they normally have a very negative self-talk.
You can be too smug, I think. You can be too smug, I think. Because that means you have no real interest in other people's points of view or judgment.
Or you rely too heavily on other people's judgment and perspective to tell you that you're doing a good job. So I'm very interested in that balance between, I need to have that internal motivation and personal clarity, but I also need to take counsel and calibrate myself, because otherwise, I could just be a maniac. So,
but we're back to the value of completing the questionnaire, is that it raises these questions.
Yes.
These questions come out of the way people describe themselves. In the context they're hoping to operate in or currently operating in.
So in terms of when we're doing profiles, there's something about somebody's actual performance capability and their potential. And I'm just kind of interested in, within profiling, is it really the conversation after the fact that picks up on whether or not this is telling us about somebody's potential? Rather than just their capability now, because for a lot of roles, we have a role now, but we want it to grow and develop, and is this person able to? So what would I be looking for in a profile?
Okay, well, the classic psychological response to that would be what's called factor G, which is the general intelligence of somebody. In other words, do they have any kind of more headroom intellectually to cope with novel learning, novel processes, and respond to more complexity in their jobs. There is also another G in personality, which is conscientiousness, on the 16PF, the Cattell profile, which is about how much graft and hard work they're prepared to put in. But one of the things I found in my years doing the assessments is I found that how the level of self-assertion, which is quite a complex thing, because it actually includes things like ambitiousness, and you're concerned to kind of get on and increase your profile and increase your sphere of influence. That, I think, is really central to that discussion.
The motivational driver?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, whether it's motivational or whether it's a trait, dispositional trait, I don't think terribly matters. But I found just discussing with senior managers who don't want to go. I mean, I did one building society, just one below board level, and that's when it really came home to me that there was a bunch of 32 people under board level, and quite a lot of them were not desperately ambitious. And they weren't terribly bothered about whether they got up to being on the board. And that seemed to be the main kind of discriminator between people who were still pushing to get on and increase their profile, rightly or wrongly, and people who are quite happy where they were.
So there's a marriage here, isn't there? That if that ambition element is high but my conscientiousness is low, I might be an absolute nightmare.
Yes,
but actually,
exactly.
if I am
a rule breaker,
that's right. So wanting to get on is one thing, but wanting to get on with no conscientiousness or low conscientiousness would indicate that actually you could be very self-focused, and it's about your journey.
And that's when the skill of the report writer is important, because looking for those connections.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the only tests that we use from a machine, from a bit of software, is one that looks for those patterns. So it will make up to 5 connections before it makes a statement. So it simulates what a psychologist would do.
Yeah.
So you have to be conscious that, okay, self-assertion is over there, but where is conscientiousness? And also, where is something like sensitivity? Are they going to try and influence others without any kind of appreciation of other people's perspectives or other people's opinions or values or feelings, or whether that's going to be too important to them, that they're almost unwilling to tread on other people's sensitivities.
See, I find that very interesting, where I think there are a lot of people who, depending on where you're going, up the food chain, so to speak, or into different sized organisations, where, for example, I notice a lot of mid-level organisations who are on a fast trajectory often go after senior individuals from much larger organisations. But when those individuals join that company, they're used to pulling a lever and 10 other people go and do it for them. Yeah. And then they intellectually know that it's not going to be like that. Yeah. But then they get in there, they pull that lever, and that lever doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Because it's not large, but they may be being paid even more, because actually we need that skill set in. And then they join, and when they pull that lever, they realise that it's connected to them. Yeah. Right? And it might be 2 decades since they've really been doing the graft.
Yeah.
And so I'm really interested in the ability to assess somebody's, and I do like what you said there, their mental capacity to take on new growth, their conscientiousness around, actually this sits with me, what is it that would get somebody through that recalibration of, I'm not in Kansas anymore, and recognizing that they intellectually knew what they were getting into, but in truth they didn't know what they were getting into, and now they've got to adapt, they've got to take on that ownership, they cannot rely on others, they're going to have to engage others, whereas before they were very senior and everybody engaged with them. Yeah. And I think that's where the back to your point, the knowing the context, the profile might tell us, but your context is shifting, and I think that's quite interesting.
I think one of the things that can be very important there is the appreciation of other people's stakeholders.
Yes.
Other people's perspectives, and being able to anticipate stakeholder reactions, and being aware that there are other. One of the things I find in, say, the police force is you get to a point where you're hard-nosed, practical, realistic, task-focused deliverer of results, and that gets you to a certain point, and then beyond that point, it's a whole different set of skills. Yeah. It's actually, your ability to work with social services and the probation services and the local authority and the health service, and being aware of all these different perspectives and how they might actually feed in and constrain your own decision making. And that's where things like the measurement of sensitivity becomes really, really important, and then picking up on that and having a discussion.
And that doesn't mean being sensitive, which would be a different thing.
No, it's being aware of being willing to appreciate other people's perspectives.
And I find that quite interesting, that some people, I think, particularly people that may have been overtrained, go, well, you've got to have an emotional intelligence, which I think they think means being emotional. But actually it means, no, I have to have a radar that can read the room and pick up on how I might be feeling and how others might be feeling. It doesn't mean that I inherently care about people, but it means that I can see it, act on it, and engage you in a way where you feel that I've heard you, listened to you. Yeah. That doesn't mean that I necessarily care about you.
Yeah.
And I'm quite interested in that difference.
Yeah, that's the difference between. There's these things you can differentiate and discriminate with on something like the PF, because you have one factor that is very specifically about your willingness to be involved with others, and the extent to which you actually understand other people's perspectives. So it's that kind of wanting to be socially involved or personally involved, and also wanting to be emotionally involved.
And that doesn't mean does it?
In fact, one of the problems I found with the PF
Right.
is that it marries up two quite different things. It's sociability and affiliativeness. So one of the tests we use actually splits that up. So I had a manager, for example, who was a classic. He was very high on the sociability one, really, really good working with others, but actually quite detached.
Yes.
Had no genuine interest in others. But he was sociable, you know. So.
Well, I think that's okay.
It is okay.
I think because...
And particularly, and he was the chief exec, so
yes,
it was quite important for him to maintain that detachment. But he was actually, observably, quite a friendly guy.
Well, I look at somebody who I know is in the and works in A&E, or somebody I know who works for the fire brigade, and if they intrinsically cared about every single person they came into contact with, they'd lose their marbles within a week.
You'd have a nervous breakdown, yeah.
You couldn't do it. So they have a duty of care. Yeah. I mean, occasionally they may take a particular care with somebody, but in truth, it's not about, oh, you've got to care for people. No, you've got to have a care for people. You've got to, and so I'm not really looking for people that are emotional. I'm looking for people that have an understanding of emotions. And actually that means very often, particularly at a senior level, that means that I can meet people that, affiliative-wise, may be incredibly low scoring. However, the people are really engaged by them because their sociability is high. They're very good at reading what's going on. They're very good at giving you the experience you need to engage with them. And that's okay. And I think that does away with the stereotype of what necessarily sometimes...
that combination comes out quite a lot in that you get people who are actually, in effect, quite detached, but actually quite sensitive.
Yeah.
So you've got no desire to get involved with this person, but actually you can put yourself into their shoes and understand the world from their perspective.
And you might argue from an emotional robustness perspective, that's a much more survivable way of being. If you're going to be at a senior level for a decade, 2 decades, or whatever it is, dealing with a host of emotions, in truth, how do you safeguard yourself? Well, it's not by being detached, but it's about having a care without necessarily over-caring. And I think that's the stuff that comes out in conversation and in interview, and so I find that fascinating. So, Peter, you know, with a good meal and a bottle of wine, there's a conversation I could have with you all weekend.
That did once happen to me, actually. I had a guy. It was a chief. He was applying to be a chief exec, and this is not the way I normally work, I should say. And
I caveat this story
this
with.
This is not the way I normally work. But
however,
client, big American corporation with multiple different products, and so we just can't get to the point. He seems to kind of, you know, he seems to do really well and then leave places. And I said, "Can you get to the bottom of this?" And then when I assessed him, he kind of maxed out on the scale that is about projecting your anxieties and being rude and critical. So the derailed manager. And so I said to him, I said, the way you describe yourself seems to suggest you can be quite critical of those around you. And he said, no, it's not me. So I'm never critical of anyone. And so I said, all right. So we carried on chatting about other bits of the way he described himself. Then came back to about sort of half an hour later. And I said, let's just talk about this. I said, I'm still confused. He said, yeah, I'm surrounded by idiots.
I rest my case, my lord.
And then it was just this kind of avalanche of bile and venom about all the team that he worked with. And of course, it all became clear that he got to, and then he was just so unpleasant that he had to be removed, you know. And his relationships just broke down. But the only way I got at that, which is why I brought this up, was I got a bottle of claret, opened it, I said, have a glass. And I was stressed. I would never normally do that. But I thought,
it's not standard operating practice. I understand.
I've got to get behind this score. So he loosened up hugely.
And I think that's a very particular context. But with executives, you're often having dinner or you are in a social context, and it's not always, you know, in an assessment centre. But whether or not we're having a cup of coffee and you're relaxed, or I put you at, you know, the skill of being able to work with people at a senior level who are probably very good at managing conversations and to find the mechanism to have an honest conversation without them trying to manage the conversation.
Or without filling them up with claret.
Which may not be the process that I necessarily put in the invoice, plus a bottle of claret.
Yes.
And they go, oh, yes, we know what that is. But in truth, there is a skill. There is the skill of the testing, there's the skill of the writing the report, there's the skill of the interview questions and the conversation, and there is the skill of putting somebody at ease to have an honest conversation that comes down to the dynamic of the person doing it. And that's not in the test. That's in the gravitas, the weight, the trust they have in the person that's doing it. And I have that with executive coaching, with executive development, with teams. The knowledge is the knowledge, and I think I can put a tick in the box there. But it's the ability to do the work and to create an environment where you can have those conversations. So there is jest in the port, but also it's no small thing when it comes to working with somebody like you, that it's not just what you're doing, they're also investing in who's doing it, which is somebody that can hold space with senior people and have conversations that you will get to the nub of the situation. And I think that's important.
Yeah.
Good. Well, on that note, I noticed 2 minutes that we have on the clock, so not wishing to overrun. It's not so much a time; it's more a people's attention span clock. I think I have. Here's one little thing for me: if somebody said, "Ooh, I've got to fill out a psychometric profile as part of my interview or this program, leadership development program that I'm on with Guy Bloom or whatever it is," how would you say, what's the mindset to go into it with so they can actually give a version of themselves that won't catch them out, that will be on? What's the advice that you give? Because people get quite intimidated sometimes by the idea of it.
That is a tough one, because it depends on whether you're going to do what I do, which is try and corroborate. Treat that data as problematic and inferential and in dire need of corroboration. Because if that's the case, then it kind of doesn't really matter. You can fake to your heart's content, but you're going to get found out.
So actually, don't bother.
So don't bother. However, if it's just part of a screening process, then the joke is always you always have to remember at the back of your mind then. I love my mother, I love my father, but I love my father slightly more than I love my mother. I like reading. I never get upset. So those things are the ones that get faked a lot. Neuroticism, and largely neuroticism actually. I always think other bits of the profile tend to be more resistant.
So in truth, enter into it with an understanding that in reality, if you're going to be part of a process, then all you can do is dig yourself a hole that you can't get out of. So just answer it with an open.
Just try to be
the genuine self. Well, listen, Peter, I'm going to draw us to an end. You've been an absolute rock star. I've enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you. And when I'm talking to clients and I want you to work with me, with senior teams, and we do that work, I hope that this goes some way to people having a line of sight on you.
Thank you, Aaron.
And we'll wrap it up from there. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Okay, that's it. I hope you have enjoyed listening or watching the podcast. If you have, please subscribe and tell people. You spreading the word makes a massive difference. And if you'd like to consider working with us, then make your way over to livingbrave.com.